Was it an accident? Was it murder? Was it a coincidence? Or was it an omen?
First of all,
Look at me,
David, it's a
Damien.
pleasure to meet you. I have, you've been scaring the shit out of me for 40 years, so it's a delight to meet you in person.
Looks like you made it through.
I did. I did unscathed. You know, I wanted to, over the years, if I am not incorrect, and obviously I expect you to correct me if I am wrong, but you had begun your career as a writer and maker of documentary films. And sort of one of the interesting things about this particular lot isn't just that it's the Antichrist screenplay and the Omen screenplay, but it's all the other research that went into making the film, which is something that only a documentary filmmaker or a journalist would have compiled. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, you know, how a man who was approached about doing something like The Exorcist said, you know what, that's not really my thing. However, as a journalist and as a documentarian, I think I can get to something different and deeper and darker.
That's a very perceptive question. I came to this as a documentarian and became a documentarian by accident. I had no particular ambitions coming out of college, which I was allowed to march in the graduation of, but did not actually graduate from. I had to make a living, and I thought maybe the record business, the advertising business, the TV business, I knew that I was a storyteller because everybody in my family had learned to take everything I said with a grain of salt. Isaac Bashevis Singer, accepting his Nobel Prize, said, when I was a kid, they called me a liar. Now they call me a writer. Well, that was me. Mom, I just saw the worst accident down the street, you know, and blah, 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 blah. So one of the reasons I told stories is I was a very bad reader. I had dyslexia, but nobody, this was the 40s, nobody knew what the heck was wrong with David. I remember one of the first things, I was called a finger reader, if I might digress here. You know, I would read every word. And one of the first things I remember discovering was that good is God with an extra O. And evil is devil if you add a D. So I knew the difference between good and evil. And when I got out of school, I went to New York and I was working on a game show, a live game show called I've Got a Secret. I was just, you know, a supernumerary, a spear carrier in that effort. I knew a lot about animals. I was an absolute animal freak. I was a geek lecturing about tropical fish in high school. I could read factual things better than prose, better than things that were made up, because I had a very hard time going word to word if it was not really making sense. So at any rate, I got into doing animal documentaries for the David Wolper Company. I put in a call, I faked a resume. I said I'd been an assistant curator of the reptile house at the Lincoln Park Zoo, that I was the stand-in judge of the Westminster Kennel Club. You know, I gave them just a bunch of bullshit, but you know, everybody flies to Hollywood on the wings of bullshit. And so they brought me out there. And one of the documentaries I did, and yes, I really, really took to it, the thoroughness of the research. It was a miraculous time for me. I was in the company of people who would deeply affect my life, like Jacques Cousteau, like Bobby Kennedy, whose whole family affected my life. And I did a documentary about insects. And it was the point at which I realized there was narration, voiceover, how the whales mate, off the beaches of Bora Bora. And then there was something called dialogue, which I experienced for the first time doing a documentary called The Hellstrom Chronicle, which won an Academy Award. My college roommate played a fake doctor who actually delivered lines on camera to the screen in dialogue. I thought, hey, that was easy. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write movies. I really loved film. It was a major part of my life, was going to the movies. And I started telling everybody I was going to be a screenwriter. Nobody believed me until My bosses, David Wolper and Mel Stewart at the documentary company, who had made the switch into features, done a couple of movies that didn't make much noise, had actually secured Roald Dahl to write a screenplay of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And he left, a famous rageaholic. He threw 41 pages at them that they weren't satisfied with. And they called me and said, "Hey, kid, can you really write a screenplay?"
Right.
"Yes, sir. What do you got?" "Well, Dahl left. We'll fly you out here, coach. We'll put you up in a second-class hotel, and you have to do it anonymously. Nobody can know you were here. You have to be the ghostwriter. And in exchange for that, we will produce your first screenplay." So I am the writer of Willy Wonka, and word got out. So I'm not telling tales out of school, but everybody now connected to that movie knows, plus this gigantic fan club, etc. But what it did was position me to write my first screenplay. The words I wrote for Willy Wonka at the very end, which I did at the very end, flying by the seat of my pants, were based on, there was no ending, and I had already left Munich. I was in a log cabin in Maine trying to recover, and I got a call from them and said, "You left us with no good last line." I said, "What's the last line?" "They're up in the Wonkavator, Charlie and Willy Wonka, and he's won the contest, and Wonka tells him he's not just won a lifetime supply of candy, but he's won the whole damn factory, and his parents can move in. His whole family can live there forever." And Charlie says, "Yippee." I said, "Yeah." We agreed that the last scene would be as Dahl wrote it in the book. He said, "You call yourself a writer? And the screenplay ends with yippee?" I said, "Mel, no one will know I ever wrote a movie." And he said, "Oh, they will if it ends with yippee." So anyway, I thought, how do I end this movie? They all lived happily ever after? No, that's stupid. That's how every child's fable ends. And I could think of nothing else except that they all lived happily ever is narration. And I'm now a writer of dialogue. I said, "Okay, Mel, here's what happens. They're up in the Wonkavator. Willy Wonka tells Charlie he's won everything. Charlie says, yippee, yeah, yeah." But then Wonka says, very cautiously, "But Charlie, don't forget what happened to the man who suddenly got everything he ever wanted." And Charlie said, "What happened?" And Willy says, "He lived happily ever after." Okay, that's a writer of dialogue, not narration. I had nothing to do with this movie in post-production. They wouldn't let me near it. Dahl was furious that this movie actually got made and was looking for the Hollywood hack who did it. And so I lined up on a Saturday matinee and saw this movie, and I thought it was amazing what they did with it. That Gene was wonderful. I met Gene on the set, by the way. He was the only one who knew I was writing it. And at the very end, I mean, I got the laughs it expected. I got the surprise yipes when the kids were offed one at a time. I never expected people to cry at that last line. He lived happily ever after. And when I looked around myself in the theater and saw that, kids hugging their parents, parents hugging their kids, because of that last line, it wouldn't have happened with Yippee, I don't think. I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to write things that impact people emotionally. This is a long way from your question. But
Okay.
I started writing very sweet stories. One about a divorce, one about a father with adopted kids, et cetera, et cetera. So much so that there was a picture of me in the Hollywood Reporter that said, "David Seltzer, the Sultan of Sobs." And my mother thought that was a good review. It was definitely not. So when I got a call from someone who said, "Did you see The Exorcist?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I want something like that." I thought, oh, no longer the Sultan of Sobs. Here we go.
The Sultan of Scares.
The Sultan of Scares. From a conservative/Orthodox Jewish family, the devil was not a factor in that, the devil is not in that religion. And so to me, it was a cartoon character with a pitchfork and horns and, fire in the background. And I thought, I'm not going to do something about a cartoon. I will have to treat the devil as though it's real. And I said, how could I possibly do that? But I had just seen Spielberg's movie in which a fish ate a boat at the end. So I thought, okay, that everybody screamed, everybody thought that was real. I'll figure out how to write about the devil. And I had never opened a Gideon Bible, a Christian Bible, and started reading, started looking, I eventually had touched about 11 different versions of the Bible. This being a kid who could barely read, but I was completely captivated by the stories, how preposterous they were and wonderful they were. And there were actual character arcs, and there were lines that were poetic. And I came across something about the son of Satan. As God had a child, so did the devil. My gosh, maybe I am still writing about family. and I had been involved, actually, and then I came to the passage that said, I had a lot of interpretive texts. And one of them said that the unholy one, the beast, shall rise from the eternal sea. And there was an interpretive text that translated the eternal sea into the world of turmoil and revolution. Revolution, okay, the world of politics. The devil's child will come into the world of politics. I knew about the world of politics from a family that was a wonderful family that was really cursed, the Kennedys. I knew Bobby only a few days before he was killed, working on a documentary crew, doing behind-the-scenes footage for his campaign, and we connected. He was an animal lover as well. And I wasn't actually at the hotel. My wife had gone into labor that very night, and I was just totally shocked that had happened, and wound up in their home shortly after, looking at home movies, because I was going to make, and we did make, a 90-minute television documentary called The Journey of Robert F. Kennedy. But I got to know the family very well. Okay, the Kennedy family. Joseph Kennedy was the ambassador to the court of St. James in England. They had nothing but bad luck in that family, terrible luck. You could imagine that they had the curse of hell on them. And I thought, I'm going to write as the head of a family, the ambassador to the court of St. James. And he is going to adopt, unmindfully, accidentally, out of love, he is going to become a guilty hero. He is going to adopt the son of Satan. And I had inadvertently, knowing nothing, created a guilty hero and an innocent villain that just played so perfectly against each other, because each of them acting out of a sense of honesty and oblivion until it began to add up. What the hell was going on? When I found the 3 sixes, by the way, the first title of this was The Antichrist, and that's
part of this auction.
Part of the auction. The title was later changed to Birthmark, because the Antichrist seemed too on the nose. The Birthmark were the 3 sixes. I had also transposed the 3 sixes into a calendar date. 666. It actually was June 6 at 6 a.m. Was your son perhaps born at 6 a.m., Mr. Thorne? Yes. So was the son of the devil. At any rate, so, I just had everything I needed at that point to start putting this together, and had the happiest accident of finding a group of people who lifted it off the page and made it better on the screen. That's never happened since. Dick Donner and the British crew took this as seriously as it was meant to be taken. And honestly, without Gregory Peck and his dignity and his straight face, I think this could have gotten laughs. But every time we cut to Peck, oh my God, this poor man, look what's happening.
So I wanted to ask you about, because I want to back up just a little bit, because I'm sort of fascinated by the fact that you have talked in the past about the fact that if Gregory Peck had not been the star of the film, that it could have, as you just said, been played for laughs. But certainly the intention of the screenplay, the result of your research, wasn't meant for laughs. It was meant to be something terrifying. So how do you think it could have veered in that direction? And what do you think kept it from going in that direction? Was it Richard Donner? Was it Gregory Peck? Was it just the fact that they understood the gravitas of the screenplay that someone else might have rendered camp, for a better word?
When Gregory Peck showed up at the set, I ran up to him. I was so excited. This is at Shepperton Studios in London. And I ran up to him holding the script, and he thought I wanted an autograph. I looked a lot, I was in my early 30s, I guess. I was about 30, and I looked a lot younger. Anyway, he said, okay, who's it to? And I pointed to the name on the front. I said, I'm David Seltzer. He said, wait, you're David Seltzer? I said, yeah. He said, you're the writer of this? I said, yeah. He said, I was expecting a grizzled old man with a gray beard. And I said, well, are you disappointed? He said, yes, but we'll carry on.
Why? I'm curious, why did he think you would be a older, grizzled, bearded man? What was it about the screenplay?
Well, I'm actually addressing your question because it was so deeply researched. He thought it must be somebody who has a religious background, enough wisdom and years to put all these pieces together, and he was quite surprised. I knew the book of Revelation from at least 11 Bible back and forth, so much so that when I made up a verse, it was believed even by theologians, which is part of what's being auctioned, is all the back and forth is, where did this come from? It's when the Jews return to Zion and a comet rips the sky and the Holy Roman Empire rises, you and I must die. From the eternal sea he rises with armies on either shore, turning man against his brother till man exists no more. Okay, the Bible, though it has its internal rhythmic passages, doesn't rhyme like that.
Right.
So I assumed people would know that this was this priest waxing poetic, but everybody took it to be a real biblical verse, which was quite flattering, as did Peck, as did Patrick Troughton, who spoke it. It was, listen, the Bible itself is a preposterous story. And look how many people believe it. Look how many people believe there's, I'm not anti-religion. I have no judgment whatsoever, but it's easy to buy into this. It could have been with the wrong cast, with a cast who you didn't look at. This is Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. You don't get more grounded than that. And originally Charles Bronson was the choice. Yeah. And that's when I thought, okay, I did my best, and hopefully he'll do it. The movie is not an easy thing to make. In failure, we must not make fun of it, because everybody tried their damnedest. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, maybe Charles Bronson will be up for this, but oh my God, the ambassador to the Court of St. James, no. It was, this movie was going to be made by Warner Brothers, who had done The Exorcist. I may have my studios wrong here, but at any rate, we were being detained by the studio who did The Exorcist, not planning to make The Omen. They were just going to take an option on it and hold it until they could get Exorcist 2 on the screen, which they basically did. It came back to us, and the producer knew Dick. They played tennis together. Dick knew Greg. They played tennis together, and that's how it all came together in a miraculous new form. The original director was a stuntman who was going to direct his first movie. So this is just a series of, listen, I made my deal with the devil, and he came through.
Very fortuitous circumstances, to say the
Yeah,
least.
absolutely.
So as you're working on it, because I'm fascinated by Because the writer has only so much control, which is to say none at all.
Certainly in those days, zip.
Certainly in those days. So as the process is going forward, sort of where are you in watching it as Bronson is being cast, as other directors are being discussed? You certainly don't have the power to stand up and say, look, this is not who I imagine. Gregory Peck has a Kennedy-esque quality to him, obviously. He is, as you say, Atticus Finch, any number of heroic roles over the course of his career, even some villainous roles, but certainly always with great stature and gravitas. So as that process is playing out, are you like, we're going to miss the meaning of this film and waste this research that I have put into it?
Nope, I'm just the kid. I'm just the kid who brought the script to the set, basically. Now, I want to say two things. One thing about Donner was strict about everything looking real. I had something in the original script about the graveyard where there were creatures that had cloven hooves, and Dick said, no, nothing that's not real, that couldn't be real in the real world, can go into this. In terms of my input on the set, no, I just marveled that what I had written in a stage direction, that there were rats in the cemetery. Someone was training rats on the set to skitter underfoot. That's how seriously they took this in London. But Gregory Peck was unusual in that he actually is a student and of the written word. He writes himself, and he wrote poetry, and he became fascinated with me, and realized that I was the source of this, and I went to the set at their sufferance, just as a fan, to sit there and watch it go down. And Peck would look at me instead of the director at the end of a take, and I love Dick Donner, and I think he was a genius, and we remained friends. But it was it was annoying to everybody that Peck was looking to me for approval. And so I was asked to leave. And he and I hooked up later as friends and knew each other forever. And he said, whatever happened to you? What business carried you away? And I said, well, I just had other things to do. And I said, frankly, they didn't like that you were depending on me.
Did he ever ask to see any of the research that you had done to talk sort of more in depth about what this meant, what this movie was about?
Not asked to see the research. He just thought I was the fount of knowledge, and we did talk about it a lot. We talked about the forces of good and evil, and how the innocent are swept into it under false pretense, and he so appreciated. I mean, a lot of people, let's face it, a lot of people have Damien in their family. I mean, so,
Yeah.
Sometimes shit happens, and you have to make the best of it until you throw up your hands. Greg had lost a son very recently, and I think that had something to do with his choice of this. He felt, we didn't talk about it at great length. So many of my father figures had lost sons, me included, when I became a father. Jacques Cousteau, Bill Holden, these were all people I chose as surrogate fathers. It was very common to lose a son, at least in our small circle. So it was a subject. I, of course, was a kid. I didn't have a son at the time Greg had lost his. But at any rate, there was a heaviness to what Greg did. And he's just such a miraculous actor. Anyway, but I did come back once, frankly, to see a woman on the set who I'd become quite fond of. And I was there on the day when they did the decapitation. The Jennings character bends down to pick up the daggers, and a piece of glass slices through its head. Right. Now, the way I'd written that was not that. Dick did it that way. I wrote that when he bent down to pick up the daggers. There was a construction crane overhead carrying a huge pane of glass that dropped it, and he got guillotined. Okay? Dick thought, what would happen if we used gravity here in a different way and we did it on a horizontal plane? And I was there the day they did that, and I saw that head roll. It was David Warner, by the way, P.S., as an aside, someone asked him whatever happened to that head, and he said, truthfully, I lost it in the divorce. At any rate, I saw that happen, and I thought, and then I saw the dailies in super slow motion. And I thought, this picture is really going to work. There was only one movie I knew of called Love Story that had a novelization written before the movie came out. And it was Love Story by Eric Siegel. And I thought, I'm going to run home and write a novel. And I did. and I beat it to the marketplace by about 8 weeks. It came out about 8 weeks before the movie did. And it was a phenomenal success.
I read the book before I saw the movie as a kid.
Yeah, I didn't know how to write a book. I was just da-da-da-da-da-da, here we go. But it was, for a story about the worst, people had the worst luck in the world, it was just a great good luck launch for me.
I've always wondered, it's funny, there probably were a lot of folks in my generation, I'm 56, who always thought the film was based on the book. I don't think that we were smart enough to realize it was the other way around.
No. I've gotten extreme compliments from Quentin Tarantino, who thought the same. He had read the book and thought the movie came from it, and that they had to eliminate so many good things.
What was the most fun part of writing it? Because I will tell you this, as a writer myself, I've always imagined that coming up with unique ways to kill people is probably the most fun part of writing a screenplay.
I'm with you as a writer. As a matter of fact, I have something on my screen that I'm working on that can advertise 7 deaths you've never seen before. That's the subtitle.
Well, everybody talks, right? I mean, that was one of the great legacies of the film, is everybody talked about all the different ways people died, whether, the lingering image of a priest leaning against the thing that had killed him was certainly a thing that lingered with me very, very long after I was a kid. Or even the, this is all for you, Damien. This is certainly one of the most terrifying images. I mean, that's one of the most remarkable things about the Omen. The Antichrist piece of it aside, it was always these images, these remarkable, unforgettable, seared into the brain images of how these people died.
That's Dick. But let me tell you about that. That javelin that came from the cross of the steeple of the church and went through him, that cost about $7. These days it would cost maybe $200,000. It was a little hollow piece of balsa wood on a fishing line that strung from the steeple to a point right behind Patrick. And on cue, it slid down, and when it hit the ground, he went like that. It never touched him.
Right.
And he just hung like that, and it was in the ground behind him. I mean, it was just extraordinary that worked. That's for Holly Palance, who became a good friend and still is. The nanny, who said, "This is all for you, Damien."
Right.
It has echoed behind her on every sidewalk she's ever walked down. When people recognize her, "It's all for you, Damien." She looks exactly the same. That was my invention, that she was the first sacrifice that we knew of. There was the dog there. It exchanged eye contact with Damien, and there she was, being the first sacrifice so that he could go on. Dick is the one who put the window behind her to crash into and swing back and forth. So it would give time for a shot of everybody on the ground to watch it and register it. He's brilliant. Dick Donner was just brilliant. And
one of my favorite directors.
Yeah. And when I first saw the movie, I was not happy with it because I had never seen a rough cut. It wasn't color corrected. It had no music. It was even the cemetery was broad daylight. And I left very disappointed. And Dick called me. He said, somebody said you didn't like the movie. I said, Dick, I have to tell you, I'm disappointed. He said, okay, I have a guest house. I want you to pack a bag and move into it and see a psychiatrist every day because you're fucking crazy. This movie is great. You are the only person who has a problem with it.
I was just about to ask you your reaction the first time you saw the film, and I don't think I could have expected a story better than that.
That was it. I later saw it. I didn't go to an industry screening. I was living in Ojai and quite aloof from Hollywood hoopla. And I just went to see it at a theater in Santa Barbara when it opened. And I saw that audience scream when the nanny jumped on Peck. I mean, and hold each other. And I mean, I thought, holy mackerel, what do we got going on here? And so that was my first exposure to it, alone in a theater with strangers, watching that happen.
And then you thought what?
I did not think, I'm not sure what your question.
Well, when you saw it, when you realized audiences were reacting to it, and that the version you were then seeing was, because certainly when you put something on the printed page, it works its way through this process. The initial version you see, the work print being disappointing, and then to have it come full circle when it is a fully realized version of this thing that you would spend so much time working on, thinking about, and researching. I sort of wonder, is it overwhelming? Is it a relief? Is it joy?
It's overwhelming. I was actually having a very troubled time in my life. I was in the process of a divorce that I didn't see coming and didn't want to happen. So I wasn't, that's why I was at the theater alone. And I came home and pretty much had to keep it to myself that something wonderful, something wonderful had resulted from the script that I wrote. I was, just let me say, when I saw the movie, I was absolutely overwhelmed at the fealty of Dick and everybody who made that movie to what I wrote, and it was better than what I wrote. I've never had that happen again. It's always the other way around.
So I'm going to wrap this up by asking you this question, which is, obviously you've held on to all of this material for a very long time. And I'm curious, certainly someone who's going to wind up with this is going to be a very big fan of the Omen and a very big fan of yours and what the film meant and what it meant to them. Is it difficult parting with it now, or is this a thing where it's like it's time for somebody else to own this thing, these pieces of your significant cinematic history?
It is in no way difficult to let go of. I stumbled on it by accident, cleaning out a closet when I moved. I stumbled upon some Emmy Awards. I'm not.
So you're not a nostalgic man.
I wouldn't say that. But nothing pleases me more than what is being auctioned, bringing pleasure to somebody else. It's an extension of what I try to do as a writer, is in some way improve the quality of life, including the Omen. I thought that would be something that people would carry with them, have conversations about, find certain similarities, some analogies, some metaphors. I may never know personally the person who winds up owning this, but I would hope that it would be something that would make them very happy to own.
I will tell you this, having sat down with it the other day and having had the real honor and pleasure of sitting down with the screenplays and the research, I was just kind of in awe of it. I spent 30 years as a print journalist, so I accrued any number of things that I used for stories and documentation, none of which I really seem to have kept. But it is remarkable to sort of be there after all these years of living with the Omen, not to mention all of the iterations that followed, it certainly was a film that lived on that continues to live on and on and on, as a matter of fact. But to sit there and be part of and have my hands on the origins of it is really a kind of remarkable thrill, to sort of get your hands on the beginning of a thing that impacted and influenced so many.
Robert, what a beautiful thing to say. I have always cried easily, and I am now, so maybe you should not include that. But I am so flattered at those words. Thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I got to tell you, David, it's a real thrill to get to talk to you. This has been just an absolute pleasure. As someone who's been a big fan of yours and your work, and as someone who knew that you wrote Willy Wonka, just so you know. In fact, I told my son that I'm interviewing the man who wrote The Omen. He goes, yeah, I've never seen it, because he's 21 and he doesn't like scary movies. But I said, well, I tell you what, he also wrote Willy Wonka. He said, oh, well, shit, that's cool. So he was very impressed by that.
Tell him hi for me and thank you.
I will.